there is no mystery about how this is going. And we all knew what the vote was going to be. We have so thoroughly self-segregated our body that Republican Senator Creighton could not accept a single Democratic amendment. Not a one. We are so thoroughly self-segregated that any amendments had to come under his name or one of our other Republican colleagues' names. And it had to happen before we hit the floor. That is how segregated we are. And this bill itself acts to further the self-segregation of the state of Texas. We have a constitutional obligation to provide a system of free public schools. And yet a majority in this chamber neglects the essentials to lavish money on a tiny segment of Texans who send their kids to private school. Nowhere in the Texas Constitution does it say that we have an obligation to subsidize private schools, and nor should we. When the state is failing on so many of our constitutional obligations, we are dead last in the number of Texans with health insurance. We are dead last in access to mental health care. While 140 Texas counties don't have a private school, half of those counties also don't have a hospital. We are among the 10 worst states in criminal justice, among the 5 worst in protecting our environment. Our grid failed, even though we are the largest producer of energy in the United States, and we may run out of drinking water if we don't act decisively this session. But miraculously, our system of public education is not ranked at the bottom. We are actually pretty average, despite our overall funding being flat or declining since 2019. Despite teachers being paid $9,000 less than the national average. In spite of per pupil funding being $4,000 less than the national average. And don't be deceived by the creative accounting of $14,000 to $16,000 per student. The actual number that is an apples-to-apples comparison is the $6,160 per student that's truly comparable to the $10,000 that we're proposing to pay to private schools in this bill. And while Senator Creighton says it's a myth that this plan takes funding out of public schools, his assertion runs into some problems, let's say, since schools in my district alone will lose $35 million for a 1% transfer to private schools. $35 million translates to 538 teachers. And recapture will increase due to this transfer to private schools. AISD recapture alone last year was $693 million. The statewide recapture, $2,873,985,918. We won't stay barely average if we move $1 billion to private schools and siphon off 1% or more of our students from our public schools. And I want to speak to the race issue, which is kind of weird for me, right? I am a white woman representing a district that is, like private schools, over 70% white. and wealthier than the average Texan. But this bill is not for low-income Texas students. At 500% FPL, it's available to kids of engineers, economists, law professors, dentists, orthopedists, 80% of all Texans. This bill is not for kids of color. Under Senator West's questioning, Senator Creighton admitted that 70% of private school students are white. Under Senator Gutierrez's questioning, although Senator Creighton was uncomfortable with it, it's corroborated by the LBB analysis that more than 75% of the recipients of these vouchers will be students who are already in private school, meaning that private school enrollment is not going to get any less white with this program. I have no problem with private schools. Like I said, my constituency looks a whole lot like private school attendees, more than 70% white and wealthier than the average Texan. I have no problem with private schools, as long as they don't take all the advantages of public funding with none of the obligations. They don't have an elected school board binding them to their community. They don't have any open meetings requirements. They don't have to publicly share their budgets. They don't have to use certified teachers. They aren't subject to state testing requirements. They can advertise to lure students away from public schools. They can lobby with their private funds, just as charter schools do now. And most of all, they don't have to educate all Texans because they are private. They can cherry pick their students from among the families that can afford tuition. They can cream. They can pick the trophy kids, the legacy kids, the kids that are most profitable. And that is their private prerogative, but not if they're publicly funded. So in closing, I want to speak directly to my constituency. As I said, mostly white, mostly wealthier. 97% of my constituents who reached out to me on this bill oppose it. When this private school voucher ESA passes, my constituents are going to be inundated with advertisements from private schools attempting to lure them away from their neighborhood public schools. Inundated, because my constituents are the perfect target. But I am begging my constituents to stick with our neighborhood public schools. Engage, 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 stay engaged. Because if we lose our public educational system, we all lose. All of us.